A new book describes downtown St. Louis as a national treasure. We'll have details next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. Well, NiNi Harris has written something like 15 books, most recently for Reedy Press. They have to do with everything about St. Louis, from history and architecture to the Civil War. And what have I left out, NiNi Harris?
Well, different ethnic groups and their particular roles in St. Louis history, different sites and neighborhoods.
Now, this is a second edition. Why did you do a second edition?
Because I had to add more. I just had to expand upon it, both with photographs and storylines that are in it.
I want to read just the first line from your foreword. Is written by someone I know, radio's Charlie Brennan. And I just want you to comment on this because I think it kind of says a lot. Charlie says in the foreword, with the exception of beer and baseball, too little of downtown's history is known by adults and inhabitants, adults, see, I can't even say it. Too little is known by the adults who inhabit it every day. So just comment on that.
Absolutely right. They are in the middle of what is actually a work of art. The buildings, the individual buildings are extraordinary, and how they fit together is extraordinary. And that setting has been the stage for these great movements in American history. And they don't realize when they walk the streets of St. Louis, they walk in downtown, they are walking in the footprints of history.
And where did you find, you have some incredible photographs, both old and new. Where did they come from?
Well, some came from Missouri Historical, other came from private collections or small collections. I got a couple from Carondelet Historical Society. I got one out of somebody's family album. So it's a whole range of places.
And in your book, too, you make some reference to the voices that we hear in your book, and they're voices of everyone. I think the way you put it is from famous people to the everyday person walking down the street. Where did you find these voices?
Oh my goodness, I've been collecting them for years. Now back in the 1980s, now almost 40 years ago, I was interviewing my neighbors who were then retirees, who had worked their careers in downtown St. Louis from the time they were teenagers. So I talked to them about what downtown was like in the 1920s, what it was like when Lindbergh flew over downtown as a celebration after his transatlantic flight. My neighbor, oh, Mr. Lafser, he was the most prim and proper Victorian-like gentleman, and he made eyeglasses. And he told me that when he was studying to be an optometrist, they were in a building across from the Ambassador Theater. And the Ambassador Theater had the Ambassadorables, their chorus line. And he and all the young optometry students used to go to the windows, drop all their work and go to the windows at one point, because they could look down into the dressing room of the Ambassadorables, and they knew just when their costume changes were. And this prim and proper gentleman is telling me about the joys of going to school in downtown St. Louis and watching the chorus girls.
Peeking through windows, is that in the book?
Peeking through, yes, actually it is, it is. But he was so proper and it was so wonderful. But there are other voices like Tennessee Williams, I have in there how he spent his Saturdays in downtown St. Louis. And he'd go to the Mercantile Library. And then he had a favorite little restaurant he'd go to lunch, and then he'd take the service car back to the West End. The wedding of Ulysses S. Grant was in downtown St. Louis. So I have a description of the wedding.
Well, the pictures really tell the story here.
Oh, they do.
Don't they? So why don't we take a look at some of those images from your book, Downtown St. Louis, the second edition. with NiNi Harris, and you can kind of give us the story behind the pictures. There's the front of the book, the cover of the book.
And there we have a Charleston contest on the front steps of City Hall. Here we look at what downtown was like in its early days. This is a map showing downtown St. Louis in 1804. And for generations, all of St. Louis was in what is now downtown.
So wasn't Soulard there first?
No.
Okay.
No, and this was basically the arch grounds, except the square on the north end with 9 blocks, that's what's now Laclede's Landing, and this extends a little south of the Poplar Street Bridge. But here we have what the housing was like in downtown.
Downtown? That looks like out in the county somewhere.
No, that's downtown St. Louis. That's the Bourgeois house, and it measured 18 feet deep by 35 feet wide. So this would have been a large home.
And that was there in 1803?
1804 it was there. This was a large, sophisticated home. For instance, it had shingle roofs. Oh, we're moving pretty quickly here. Here we have downtown in 1840, or the riverfront as it was pictured or drawn and then printed by a Swiss visitor. His name was John Caspar Wilde, and it shows all the building going on along the riverfront. The building on, if you're looking at it to your left, the red building, that was a combination of Public Market and City Hall, and that was at the foot of Market Street at the river. And you see the riverboats lining the levee. This area, this little piece of real estate, was the point of origin for all the explorers, the military expeditions, the missionaries going west. They all came through this little piece of real estate.
Now that's a beautiful piece of art too.
Isn't it?
Is there a lot of art of that quality that?
A number of them from 1840 showing what St. Louis was like, all done by this John Caspar Wilde. He'd come to the United States and worked in the East, and then he came out west to show the people in the East through his artwork what was going on along the Mississippi.
What's this one?
Well, here we have St. Louis University, founded in 1818 on the riverfront. In 1829, after the Jesuits had taken over the management of the college, and they moved it to Washington Avenue. And on the left is Washington Avenue, and the street in the foreground is 9th Street. So that's right by the convention center. And that's what the campus looked like.
So all of that is gone.
All of that is gone. On the right is the original college church, which was a brick building, a little smaller scale than the old cathedral. But Washington U started downtown too. And at these institutions, well, like at St. Louis U, there on Washington, one of the early students was Toussaint Charbonneau, son of Sacagawea.
Wow.
And people who later became territorial governors out west and all had gone to St. Louis U at that old campus in downtown.
Let's look at the next image from your book, Downtown St. Louis, second edition from Reedy Press.
Well, Eads Bridge is a work of art. It is also an engineering marvel, and it changes the character of downtown. It was the river that gave St. Louis a reason to be, but then following the Civil War, with the industrialization going on and it being dependent on the new rail transportation, the river was a barrier towards St. Louis's economic future. And only Eads had the vision of how to bridge that river.
We're still using it today.
And now it's got the Metrolink on it. It's just wonderful. It's a great ride with great views. So this spurred this great building boom in St. Louis, and Eads Bridge just really sent St. Louis on this tremendous, almost high. And among other things, the building we know as the old post office, they began construction in 1872, but it was a federal court and customs house or bank and had all sorts of courtrooms and federal offices, and it was out in what they considered the western part of downtown on 8th Street. Now, there were 5 of these built during Reconstruction around the United States. And we can really pat ourselves on the back in that the only one that has survived is in downtown St. Louis.
No kidding. That's
Yeah, isn't it special? Yeah.
Let's look at the next one.
Well, we're just building like mad during this
That's
era.
got to be Union Station, isn't it?
That is the Grand Hall at the dedication on September 1, 1894.
It's one of my favorite spaces.
Isn't it? It's just the plaster work, the gold leaf, the metal work, the stained glass, every aspect of it is extraordinary.
Do we know what's going on?
Yeah, that's the dedication day.
Oh, the dedication.
And 50,000 people show up. From the poorest to the wealthiest, everybody is celebrating this civic ornament that was the largest train station in the world at that time.
Let's go to the next one.
Well, we were sure proud and growing. And we built a city hall. Takes us from 1891 to 1904. They did it all out of the city budget each year. And the final feature of it is this extraordinary rotunda with all this magnificent Italian white marble.
I always thought City Hall looked more like it could be the capital of some country somewhere.
It could be, and absolutely, and it is modeled after the City Hall of Paris.
Oh.
And it's another work of art. People go in there just thinking about, oh, we're going to pay taxes. And that's what they're thinking about. And they need to stop and look and see what they're in the middle of. I was shocked years ago when I was in the center of the county government center out in Clayton, and I kept looking for, like, where's the rotunda? Where's the place? And there was an escalator, and they said, you're here.
Escalator and a couch.
Yeah, but when you're in downtown in that city hall, you know government is important. They were making a statement about us as Americans that government and our participation in it is something uniquely American, and there was so much civic pride in the creation of that building.
And let's look at another image from the book.
Well, people from all over the world know this one, and it is our wonderful Wainwright Building, designed by Louis Sullivan, and with this...
One of the most noted architectures of his day.
Absolutely. And it was in St. Louis. He was a Chicago architect, but he opened an office here, and it was here in St. Louis that this building he designed showed how to build tall. This was the inspiration for a generation of skyscrapers. Before then, people, once they developed the elevator and the steel frame, they could build taller and taller, but it had no distinctive style. He said a skyscraper should be lofty, and everything should, all its decoration should be one unit that looks to its height. And that's what he did there. And that's, I know people who come from England to see that building.
Wow. Well, we're appreciating all the things that St. Louis has to offer architecturally and historically with NiNi Harris, and we'll continue when we come back right after this. I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. Our guest today is NiNi Harris. She is an author and historian. She's written something like 15 books over the years about St. Louis. Her latest one from Reedy Press is Downtown St. Louis, second edition, full of tons of photographs and illustrations both current and older ones that kind of reflect and tell the story about St. Louis. And before we get back to looking at some of the images from your book, and each picture has an incredible story, I just want you to briefly recount the story, how you got into this. You've been interested in history your whole life. You grew up in St. Louis. What generation are you? 3 or 4 at least?
Well, on my maternal grandmother's side, her grandfather came here in 1864. Another ancestor came earlier, but we can't determine
Started about the same
But
time as my family.
That's right, and settled in the same neighborhood as your family.
Not the Potters,
Soulard
though,
area.
because that's my dad's name, but my mother was German, and so...
And from South City.
We had relatives that knew one another.
It had to be. They crossed paths, undoubtedly.
Really briefly, I want you to tell a story about this. I think it all kind of started for you seriously when you just became a teenager. When you were 13 years old, your parents decided you were grown up enough to be able to trust to use the bus and go downtown on your own.
And I went downtown Saturday after Saturday, and I would just roam. And it was spectacular. I had one problem. I got in trouble with the police because I'd be looking up at the buildings, and a couple times I jaywalked, and I got hollered at so much for jaywalking with the traffic.
Well, if you knew what I did when I was 13, jaywalking.
Oh, well, the police took it seriously and really lectured me about that. But I was always looking up because the cornices of the buildings are so spectacular. And
But ever since that day, this has been your thing.
Oh, it's a treasure. Walking through downtown is like walking into a work of art. And every time you take a step this way or that way, it changes your perspective on that artwork. You see something you didn't realize before. And it's an artwork created by generations of people from all over the world.
Well, let's take a look at more from Downtown St. Louis, second edition. And NiNi will explain what we're looking at.
This is a photo from 1919 of a business, one of the shops in the garment district. This is on the 1200 block of Washington Avenue. And at that point, downtown had become overwhelmingly business, commerce, industry. There were just pockets of residential, but all around the edges of downtown were these interesting ethnic neighborhoods. So like the people who were working in that shop would have been from Italian immigrants or Romanian immigrants who settled on the east side who took the streetcar over, or Russian or Polish, Jewish immigrants. They worked their way into being Americans on that street, in that industry.
On Washington.
On Washington Avenue.
My family was tied to the Browers, which had Brower Supply Company, which was originally down in Washington. They moved out to Forest Park Parkway. It's where IKEA is now. But yeah, so they were right down there too.
On what 100 were they?
On Washington?
Yeah.
I've got it at home. I can't tell you off the top of my head.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have quizzed you now.
16th Street or closer, 12th maybe, something like that.
Yeah. The western part where the garment district was really taking off. Yeah.
Let's take a look at another image from the book.
Well, St. Louis did great service during World War II. We were at a crossroads in the nation for transportation, and we had Jefferson Barracks, Scott Air Force Base, Fort Leonard Wood also close. So all these young guys who had never been away from home were coming through St. Louis. 100,000 passengers a day at Union Station.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. And we, in the summer of 41, before the war started, opened the USO. And the city donated the space and the utilities in the base, ground floor of what's now the Stiefel. And then volunteers raised all the money and provided all the services. They also opened a little lounge in Union Station for guys who were only here for a short time between trains. By Christmas of 44, they had served 4 million guests. I'm sorry, 3 million guests, forgive me, 3 million guests.
3 million, 4 million.
Well, it's just phenomenal. And they came away with such a love of St. Louis. And I encountered this when I would travel around the country when I started traveling in the 70s and 80s, that you would meet the seniors who all had something good to say about St. Louis because of the USO.
Let's see more from downtown St. Louis.
That's in here just because I love it, okay? That is on the old General American Life building that's on Locust, built just after the turn of the century, almost across the street from the Campbell House.
Oh.
So when you go into the Campbell House, stop and look across the street, and here is this magnificent terracotta-clad building. It's now called the Terracotta Lofts, and it is all condominiums. But there are these little terracotta figures that all look like medieval fellows sitting around on the ledges of the buildings. And there again, you know, you can keep looking in downtown. Every time I walk in downtown, I see something I've never seen before.
Let's go to the next one.
Okay, everyone in the city has done or will do jury duty. We go into the civil courts building and don't look up. There's this marvelous lobby that feels, I always say it feels like it's ancient Mesopotamia. And around the ceiling, there are all these sculptures of all sorts of images having to do with law and justice. And over the doors, we have this relief of the Ten Commandments, or symbolizing it for the beginning of law. And there are palm images all around. Those are images of justice. So again, you stop and you look and, oh my goodness, we are surrounded by artwork. You don't see that in new buildings. No. You know, it's not there.
And let's go to the next one. I wonder how many photographs you have in this book. You probably don't even know.
Hundreds.
Yeah, right.
Hundreds.
Okay, this one's a little more up to date.
Well, but it's still from before all the national park expansion there.
Right.
So you see, you've got the stadium, the New Busch Stadium, but the park before we put the park over the highway. But look at this skyline. This is instantly recognizable. You know, I was somewhere where there was this skyline being shown, and it was an aerial that they kept going over the buildings and showing them. And we're trying to figure out where it was. And we think just from size, it had to be LA, but we really weren't sure. Everybody knows our skyline.
There's another interesting detail from a building.
Well, this is from the Stiefel. WPA building, and that's the building that the USO was in the ground floor. It is a fabulous work of Art Deco architecture. We've got great Art Deco downtown, but look at those stylized, streamlined figures, and they're, you know, playing their trumpets and all the theatrical imagery in that, but it's sort of a stylized, ancient design all in one. Oh, and our doors, our aluminum doors for the elevators in Soldiers Memorial.
Really?
And look at the soldiers in their World War I uniforms. Isn't that an amazing image? We have some, this sounds silly, we have some fabulous elevator doors in downtown St. Louis.
Never heard anybody say that before.
We've got the elevator doors in the new Hotel St. Louis, which is in the old 705 Olive Building. Oh, another reason to look up, gentlemen. We've got some interesting cornices. This building was constructed in 1899. It's the B. Hat Company at 10th and Washington. And this is the height of the Victorian era. And you look up, and there are just these bosomy, naked women all around the cornice.
That guy you were talking about earlier, peeking through the windows, would have liked that.
He would have loved that view. They never would have learned to be optometrists. He said it was amazing they didn't break more. This is just one of the many terracotta panels on the Syndicate Trust building that is on Olive Street. just about a half block west of the old post office. And again, you stop and you look, and this artwork is all over this building, and that design is only on that building. Oh, it's incredible. We are so fortunate.
You said that you did the second edition because there was so much more you wanted to add.
Yeah.
Is there still more that you haven't covered? Would there be a third edition someday?
The publisher doesn't know that until right now. Yes, I've got more, and I want to do more. Yes, but already the book is pretty thick and heavy. But somewhere down the road, I'll find more photos and more stories of downtown.
I think we might have another photograph. Maybe we do. Maybe I've lost track. There we go.
We know our magnificent library. This is just the grills, the gates. And look at the detail there. The whole building is like that. Everywhere you turn around and see something, it's just a treasure.
NiNi, I know you've got a couple things on your calendar coming up. Would you mention those two events that you have?
Yes. On Sunday, February 2nd, at 1 o'clock, I'll be at the St. Louis Altenheim, atop Choteau's Bluff in South City, on South Broadway there.
I've never been there.
Oh, the views of the river are spectacular. And it was founded in 1899. And I'll be doing a program on the architecture and history of downtown St. Louis. And then we'll have books available for sale afterwards. Anybody is welcome. Anybody is welcome. Oh, and then I'm going to be at Hammond's Books on February 8th in the evening, 5:30 to 8. And that's Yovanka Hammond Shop, and she always supplies wine.
Oh.
So we sip wine and discuss history informally.
Sounds very intellectual.
Oh, the wine makes it very intellectual, yes.
Well, NiNi, I know this book's by Reedy Press. People can go to Reedy Press's website, or I guess they're sold wherever books are sold, literally, right?
That's right. And we'll be at, again, Hammond's Books and the Altenheim. We'll have them there, too. So if I get to meet people then.
Well, I know you're always active. You take tours or give tours of downtown and
Yes.
of historical cemeteries. You're still doing that, right?
Oh, right. And neighborhoods and historic businesses and all things St. Louis.
Anything coming up that we need to know about besides that?
Well, I'm going to be doing a series in the spring on the history and architecture of Cherokee Street.
There you go.
With Oasis, and then more of the Grove. I'll be featuring commercial architecture in downtown, the great hotels of downtown.
Well, NiNi Harris, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We've been talking for years, and
That's right.
I don't want to stop. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Downtown St. Louis, second edition, is the book from Reedy Press. We want to thank NiNi Harris for being here. I'm Steve Potter. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.